What are you wearing? And who gave you permission to look like that? When the most ruthless crime boss in Chicago saw his unassuming assistant in a silk plum dress, the underworld held its breath. It wasn't just a question. It was a claim. And it changed absolutely everything. Harper Evans had spent 3 years mastering the art of invisibility. Inside the sleek, glass-walled offices of Moretti Logistics, she was the consummate professional. She wore oversized navy blazers, sensible low heels, and kept her auburn hair pulled back into a severe, utilitarian bun. She was efficient, quiet, and profoundly competent. But most importantly, she was entirely unremarkable to her boss, Dominic Moretti. Dominic was not a man who dealt in the unremarkable. He was the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, a man whose legitimate shipping empire was merely a polished veneer over a sprawling, ruthless underworld operation. He was cold, calculating, and possessed a terrifyingly quiet authority. Men twice his age deferred to him, and politicians scrambled to answer his midnight phone calls. To Dominic, Harper was a machine, a flawlessly running engine that kept his schedule airtight, his meetings discreet, and his coffee exactly at 160 degrees. Until the night of the mayor's centennial gala. The event was a mandatory masquerade of high society and high-stakes criminals. Dominic's usual companion, a dazzling but vacuous socialite, had been abruptly sent out of the city after a rival family made a veiled threat against her. Dominic didn't have time to vet a new date. He needed someone who knew the players, knew the stakes, and wouldn't ask stupid questions when he stepped away to discuss illegal weapon shipments. He needed Harper. "You're coming with me," he had ordered that morning, not bothering to look up from the dossier on his mahogany desk. "Buy something appropriate. Put it on the company card. We leave from my penthouse at 8. Harper hadn't argued. Arguing with Dominic Moretti was a death sentence, sometimes literally. But as she stood in the opulent dressing room of a Michigan Avenue boutique hours later, she realized she had a problem. The racks were filled with sheer cutouts and plunging necklines, dresses meant for women who wanted to be devoured by the men they accompanied. Harper just wanted to survive the night. Then she saw it. It was a vintage-inspired gown in a deep, bruised plum. The silk was heavy, cut on the bias to drape like liquid. It had long sleeves, a high boat neckline, and an entirely closed back. It was, by all accounts, modest. But when Harper slipped it on, the modesty vanished. The heavy silk clung to her every curve, highlighting the hourglass figure she had spent 3 years burying under wool and tweed. The plum color made her pale skin glow and brought out the fiery undertones in her hair, which the stylist had insisted on leaving down in loose, cascading waves. When the private elevator doors opened into Dominic's penthouse at exactly 8 o'clock, Harper's heart was hammering against her ribs. Dominic was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. I was wearing a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. In his right hand, he held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. In his left, his phone. I was speaking in rapid, hushed Italian, the harsh consonants snapping in the quiet room. "Handle the docks. If Rossi's men step foot near Container 42, break their knees," Dominic ordered into the receiver. He turned around, still talking. "I don't care what the union says. Just—" Dominic froze. The words died in his throat. His dark, obsidian eyes locked onto Harper, and the phone slowly slipped from his ear. The silence in the sprawling penthouse became deafening, heavy, and thick with an electric tension that hadn't been there a second before. Harper swallowed hard, her hands nervously smoothing the silk at her hips. "Mr. Moretti, the car is waiting." Dominic didn't answer. He ended the call without looking at the screen, tossing the phone onto a nearby velvet sofa. He stalked toward her, his movements predatory and deliberate, like a panther realizing prey had walked willingly into its cage. With every step he took, the air in the room seemed to evaporate. He stopped mere inches from her. Up close, she could smell the faint scent of cedarwood, expensive scotch, and the metallic tang of danger that always clung to him. He was a tall man, forcing Harper to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His eyes were completely black, stripped of their usual cold indifference, replaced by something wild and terrifyingly possessive. His gaze raked over her, from the soft waves framing her face, down the tight bodice of the plum dress that hugged her breasts and waist, to the curve of her hips. When his eyes finally met hers again, there was a muscle ticking frantically in his sharp jawline. "What?" Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly scrape that sent a shiver down Harper's spine. "Are you wearing?" You told me to buy something appropriate," Harper stammered, intimidated by his sheer physical proximity. "Is it not to your liking? I can go back to my apartment and—" "Who gave you permission to look like that?" he interrupted, taking another half step forward. Harper's back hit the cold steel of the elevator door. She was trapped. Dominic lifted a large, calloused hand, a hand that had ruined lives and ended them, and let his knuckles brush lightly against the silk at her waist. The contrast of his rough skin against the delicate fabric made her breath hitch. 3 years, he murmured, leaning down so his lips were mere inches from her ear. 3 years you've been walking around my office, hiding this. Why? It's just a dress, Dominic, she whispered, realizing too late she had dropped his formal title. His eyes flashed dangerously at the sound of his first name on her lips. It's not just a dress, Harper. It's a problem. Because right now, all I want to do is rip this goddamn silk off you, and I have a room full of vipers waiting for me downtown. He stepped back, the cold mask of the Mafia Boss slamming back into place, though his eyes remained heated. Stay close to me tonight. Do not leave my sight. Understood? Yes, she breathed. Good, he said, adjusting his cuffs. Let's go feed you to the wolves. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom was a sea of glittering chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes and hidden daggers. Harper had reviewed the guest list extensively. She knew exactly who was in the room. To her left was the district attorney, currently taking a bribe disguised as a charitable donation from the head of the Irish syndicate. To her right was a prominent judge, laughing too loudly at a joke made by Dominic's underboss. But navigating the political minefield was the easy part. The hard part was the man beside her. Dominic hadn't let go of her since they stepped out of the Maybach. His hand was a heavy, branding weight against the small of her back. Every time a man looked at her for a second too long, and many did, drawn to the stunning woman in the plum dress, Dominic would shift slightly, positioning his imposing frame between Harper and the onlooker. His possessiveness was palpable, broadcasting a silent, lethal warning to every man in the room. Mine. Relax, Dominic muttered, leaning in closely to hand her a glass of champagne. You're stiffer than the statues in the lobby. I'm not used to being looked at like this, Harper confessed, taking a desperate sip of the bubbling liquid. "Get used to it," he replied flatly. "You're standing next to me, and you're wearing that dress. It's a lethal combination." Before Harper could process the compliment, if it even was one, a chilling voice cut through the jazz music playing in the background. "Dominic, you brought a new toy. How refreshing." Harper froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The slick, accented voice belonged to Lorenzo Rossi, the head of the rival Rossi family. The Rossis controlled the narcotics trade on the East Side, and they had been locked in a bloody, clandestine war with the Morettis for 6 months. Dominic's hand tightened painfully on Harper's waist. He turned them both around with agonizing slowness. Lorenzo stood before them, dressed in a flamboyant white tuxedo jacket, his dark hair slicked back. He was flanked by 2 massive men whose suits bulged suspiciously at the armpits. "Lorenzo," Dominic said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "I see they let anyone into these charity events nowadays. Better check the silverware." Lorenzo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. But his eyes weren't on Dominic. They were fixed entirely on Harper. A slow, greasy smile spread across Lorenzo's face as his eyes catalogued every inch of her. "And who is this?" Lorenzo purred, taking a step closer. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "She's my assistant," Dominic said, stepping slightly in front of her. "And she's off limits to you, Rossi. Keep your eyes on my face, or I'll remove them." Lorenzo held his hands up in mock surrender, but his smile only widened into something predatory and deeply knowing. "Your assistant? Oh, Dominic. You really don't know, do you?" Dominic's posture went rigid. "Know what?" Lorenzo's eyes flicked to Harper. Harper's blood ran ice cold. Her heart was beating so fast, she felt dizzy. "He knows," she thought frantically. "Oh God, he knows." "Why don't you ask the lovely Miss Evans?" Lorenzo sneered. "Ask her about her brother, Liam. Ask her about the $500,000 Liam owes my family for his extracurricular habits at my underground casinos. Ask her why she really took a job in the inner sanctum of the Moretti Empire 3 years ago." The silence that fell between the 3 of them was absolute, drowning out the music and the chatter of the ballroom. Harper couldn't breathe. It was true. 3 years ago, Liam, her foolish, gambling-addicted younger brother, had run up a debt with the Rosses. Lorenzo had come to Harper with an ultimatum. Get a job with Dominic Moretti, funnel the Rosses' information on Moretti's shipping routes, or they would carve Liam into pieces. Harper had taken the job out of pure terror, but she had never betrayed Dominic. In 3 years, she hadn't passed a single piece of useful information to Lorenzo. She had stalled, lied, and manipulated the data to protect Dominic. She had protected him because, against all logic and survival instincts, she had fallen hopelessly in love with the monster she worked for. Dominic slowly turned his head to look at Harper. The heat and possessiveness that had warmed his eyes all night were gone. In their place was a terrifying, hollow void. It was the look of a man who was about to order an execution. "Is this true?" Dominic asked. His voice was a whisper, but it sounded like a gunshot. "Dominic, please, let me explain," Harper pleaded, her voice trembling. Ah, Lorenzo interrupted, stepping forward. "She belongs to me, Moretti. Her brother's debt is unpaid. Her contract to me is unfulfilled. I'm calling in the marker. I'm taking the girl." Lorenzo reached out to grab Harper's wrist. He never made contact. In a blur of motion too fast to track, Dominic's hand shot out, wrapping around Lorenzo's throat. With terrifying ease, Dominic slammed the rival Mafia Boss backward, crashing him into a lavish pillar of champagne glasses. The tower shattered, glass exploding and champagne raining down. But Dominic didn't flinch. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Lorenzo's bodyguards reached inside their jackets, but before they could draw their weapons, a dozen of Dominic's men, who had been seamlessly blended into the crowd, materialized out of nowhere, pressing the barrels of silenced pistols into the spines of Rossi's guards. Dominic leaned over the gasping, choking Lorenzo, squeezing his windpipe until Lorenzo's face began to turn a mottled purple. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic piece of trash," Dominic snarled, the beast fully unleashed. "I don't give a damn about her brother. I don't give a damn about your money. She is mine. If you ever look at her again, if you ever speak her name again, I will burn your clubs to the ground, with you chained inside them. Do you understand me?" Lorenzo frantically tapped Dominic's wrist, his eyes bulging in terror. Dominic tossed him aside like garbage. He didn't wait to see Lorenzo scramble away. He turned back to Harper, grabbed her by the arm, hard enough to bruise, and dragged her toward the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP cloakroom. He threw the door open, shoved her inside among the rows of mink coats and silk scarves, and locked the door behind them. The room was dark, smelling of expensive leather and stale perfume. Dominic backed her into a wall, pressing his body against hers, trapping her. He was breathing, his chest heaving against hers, the violence still rolling off him in waves. 3 years, Dominic said, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it terrified her. "You sat outside my office, you managed my life, and all this time you were a rat for the Rossis?" "No!" Harper cried out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "No, Dominic, I never gave him anything. I swear to God. He forced me to take the job to pay off Liam's debt, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray you." "What?" he roared, slamming his fist into the wall right beside her head. "Why would you protect me over your own brother's life?" Harper looked up into his furious, beautiful face. There was no point in lying anymore. If she was going to die tonight, she would die telling the truth. "Because I love you," she sobbed, the confession ripping out of her chest. "I have loved you since the day I walked into your office. I stalled Lorenzo. I fed him fake ledgers. I risked my brother's life every day because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone hurting you." Dominic froze. The rage in his eyes flickered, colliding violently with something else, something raw and desperate. He stared at her, taking in her tear-stained cheeks, the trembling of her lips, and the plum dress that was now rising rapidly with her panicked breaths. "You love me," he repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Before Harper could answer, Dominic's hands tangled in her hair, and he crushed his mouth against hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of gravity and violence, tasting of spilled champagne, adrenaline, and desperate, unspilled secrets. Dominic kissed her like a man starving, his mouth devouring hers with a brutal, punishing heat that made Harper's knees buckle. She clutched at the lapels of his midnight blue tuxedo, anchoring herself to the storm she had just unleashed. His hands slid down the slippery plum silk of her dress, gripping her hips and lifting her flush against his hardened frame. For 3 years, she had been a ghost in his periphery. Tonight, She was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. When he finally pulled away, they were both gasping for air in the dim, leather-scented cloakroom. Dominic's forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in harsh, ragged rhythms. "If you are lying to me," Dominic murmured, the gravel in his voice laced with a lethal promise. I will ruin you, Harper. But if you are telling the truth, I will burn this city to the ground before I let Lorenzo Rossi touch a single hair on your head." "I'm not lying," she breathed, her hands trembling as they rested on his chest, feeling the steady, heavy thud of his heart. "I would rather die than betray you." Dominic opened his eyes. The obsidian depths were clear, cold, and entirely terrifying. The lover had vanished. The syndicate commander had returned. He pulled out a matte black encrypted phone from his inner jacket pocket, his thumb moving rapidly over the screen. "We are leaving. Now," he stated, stepping back and straightening his tie. "Rossi just declared war in a room full of politicians. He's going to make a move on you tonight to force my hand." He pressed a button on the phone and lifted it to his ear. "Jackson, code black at the Waldorf. Bring the Vanguard." Harper shivered at the name. She managed Dominic's schedules, but she knew to look the other way when the Vanguard was mentioned. They were Dominic's Phantom Hand, a highly structured, elite tactical unit comprised entirely of ex-military personnel, dishonorably discharged special forces, and mercenaries who operated with lethal, military-grade precision. They were the reason the Moretti Syndicate held the city in an iron grip. Less than 3 minutes later, Dominic led her out a fortified service exit into the biting Chicago night. A convoy of 3 armored, matte black SUVs was waiting, engines idling with a low, menacing growl. The perimeter was already secured by heavily armed men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, assault rifles held at low ready. A massive man with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow opened the rear door of the center vehicle. This was Jackson, the Vanguard's strike commander. "Perimeter is clear, boss. Rossi's men are scrambling in the lobby, but we've jammed their comms," Jackson reported, his voice a sharp, disciplined bark. "Get us to the ironworks and mobilize the rest of the unit. We're going on the offensive before dawn," Dominic ordered, pushing Harper safely into the reinforced cabin before sliding in beside her. The drive to the ironworks, Dominic's impenetrable compound, disguised as a decommissioned steel mill on the edge of the river, was completed in suffocating silence. Harper sat rigidly against the leather seats, the reality of her confession crashing down on her. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She was no longer just the assistant. She was the catalyst for a full-scale mafia war. Upon arrival, the heavy steel gates of the compound rolled open, revealing a bustling hive of organized chaos. Tactical personnel moved with synchronized efficiency, loading weapons, calibrating drones, and reviewing blueprints on glowing tactical tables. This wasn't a gang of thugs. This was a private army, structured, disciplined, and terrifyingly efficient. Dominic bypassed the command center, gripping Harper's hand and pulling her up a steel staircase into his private glass-enclosed war room overlooking the warehouse floor. He locked the door behind them, the heavy click sealing them away from the noise below. He poured a harsh measure of scotch into a glass and drank it neat, his back to her. "Dominic," Harper started, the silence stretching too long. "We are going to extract your brother," Dominic said abruptly, turning to face her. "Rossi thinks he holds the leash because he has Liam. We cut the leash. We blind Rossi." Harper's breath caught. Extract him. But Rossi's strongholds are fortresses. You can't just walk in. I don't walk in, Dominic replied, a dark, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. I tear the walls down. Jackson has had Rossi's East Side warehouse mapped for months. We were waiting for a reason to hit it. You just gave me the reason. He closed the distance between them, his large hands coming up to cup her face. His thumbs brushed the high cheekbones, flushed with adrenaline. When the sun comes up, your debt is erased. And then, Miss Evans, we are going to have a very long conversation about your future in my organization and in my bed. Harper's pulse skyrocketed, a dangerous thrill overriding her fear. She leaned into his touch, nodding once. Bring him back. At 0300 hours, the vanguard struck. Harper watched the operation unfold on the glowing monitors in the war room, her stomach tied in agonizing knots. The drone feeds showed the night vision green of Jackson's tactical squad moving with ghost-like precision through the abandoned rail yard bordering Rossi's stronghold. Dominic stood beside her, a headset clamped over one ear, his eyes tracking the squad's movements. He was a master tactician, watching his structured organization execute a flawless breach. Breaching charge set on the south loading dock, Jackson's voice crackled through the speakers in the room. Executing in 3, 2, 1. A silent flash illuminated the monitors, followed by the feed shuddering. The vanguard flooded the building. The tactical coordination was breathtaking. They didn't spray bullets like common street thugs. They moved in tight formations, neutralizing Rossi's guards with suppressed bursts, clearing sectors with military efficiency. Harper gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. Please be alive, Liam, she prayed silently. Please. Target room secured, Jackson's voice reported over the comms 5 minutes later. Boss, you're going to want to see this on the live feed. Feed is up. What's the complication, Jackson? Dominic demanded, his voice dangerously calm. The target isn't a hostage, Jackson replied, stepping aside so his helmet camera captured the center of the room. Harper stared at the screen, her blood running cold. There was Liam, but he wasn't chained to a radio. I wasn't bruised or starved. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, wearing a tailored suit, surrounded by ledgers and stacks of $100 bills. When the vanguard breached the room, he hadn't cowered in fear. He had reached for a gold-plated pistol, only to be immediately disarmed and forced to his knees by Jackson's men. Liam? Harper whispered, the sound entirely swallowed by the hum of the servers in the war room. Secure him and the ledgers. Bring him to the ironworks, Dominic ordered. He pulled the headset off and threw it onto the console. He didn't look at Harper. He didn't have to. The devastating realization was already suffocating her. Liam hadn't been kidnapped by Lorenzo Rossi. He hadn't been a victim of a gambling debt. He was working for him. An hour later, the steel doors of the warehouse floor clattered open. 2 of Jackson's tactical operatives dragged Liam in, throwing him onto the concrete floor at the base of the stairs leading to the war room. Liam groaned, struggling against the zip ties binding his wrists. Harper walked slowly down the metal stairs, Dominic trailing closely behind her, like a towering, lethal shadow. Liam looked up, his eyes widening as he saw his sister. He didn't look like the desperate, weeping boy who had begged her for help 3 years ago. His eyes were hard, calculating, and laced with venom. Harper, Liam spat, struggling to sit up. You stupid bitch. You brought Moretti's strike team down on my operation. Harper felt a physical blow to her chest. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the stranger wearing her brother's face. "Your operation? Liam, you told me they were going to kill you. You told me you owed them $500,000. Liam let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "I didn't owe them anything. I was laundering for them. But Rossi needed a rat on the inside of Moretti Logistics, and you were the perfect, naive little sister with a spotless resume. I sold you out to get a promotion." The words echoed in the cavernous warehouse. 3 years. She had lived in terror for 3 years, wearing clothes she hated, burying her personality, risking the wrath of the most dangerous man in Chicago, all to save a brother who had served her up on a silver platter for a corner office in a rival cartel. The grief vanished, replaced instantly by a blinding, scorching rage. Dominic stepped forward, drawing his weapon. His face was devoid of mercy. "Give me the word, Harper. Just one word, and he never breathes again." Liam's arrogant smirk finally faltered, panic bleeding into his eyes as he looked at the gun in Dominic's hand, then up at his sister. "Harper, wait, come on. We're family. You can't let him do this. I'm your blood." Harper looked at Liam. She looked at the blood on the concrete, the tactical soldiers standing at attention. And finally, she looked at Dominic. Dominic, who had ripped a man's throat out at a gala for threatening her. Dominic, who had mobilized his elite army to save a brother he thought she loved. Dominic, who saw the woman beneath the oversized blazers. Family wasn't blood. Blood had betrayed her. Harper took a step forward, reaching out and gently pushing Dominic's gun down. Liam let out a loud, shuddering breath of relief. "Thank God, Harper." "Don't shoot him," Harper said coldly, her voice echoing with a new, dark authority. She turned her eyes to Jackson, the strike commander. "Put him in the interrogation cells downstairs. Find out every single account number, shipping route, and safe house he manages for Rossi. Break him if you have to. When you have everything, dump him on the street with nothing but the clothes on his back." Liam screamed as Jackson's men dragged him away, cursing her name. But Harper didn't flinch. She watched him disappear into the shadows of the ironworks, feeling lighter than she had in 3 years. When the metal doors slammed shut, silence reclaimed the warehouse. Harper stood perfectly still until she felt Dominic's chest brush against her back. His strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "You didn't kill him," Dominic murmured against her skin. "Death is too easy for traitors," Harper replied, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "Taking his power, his money, and leaving him paranoid for the rest of his life. That's what he deserves." Dominic turned her around in his arms. The ruthless syndicate boss looked down at his assistant, his eyes blazing with a mixture of raw lust and profound, unbreakable respect. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She had adapted to his world in a matter of hours. "You look entirely too dangerous in that dress," Dominic whispered, his hands sliding up to frame her face. "I'm not your assistant anymore, Dominic," Harper breathed, meeting his gaze without a hint of fear. "No," Dominic agreed, crashing his lips down onto hers as he backed her against the cold steel railing. "You are my queen, and tomorrow we take over the rest of the city." The ultimate betrayal didn't break Harper. It forged her into a queen. "What did you think of that jaw-dropping twist with Liam? Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones sharing your blood. If you loved the intense tactical action and the scorching romance between Dominic and Harper, hit that like button, share the story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling underworld romances. Drop a comment below. You have spared Liam, or let Dominic pull the trigger.